An acquisition is a film that's been funded and completed prior to coming to a broadcaster, and then you look at buying it outright to show in your territory. I think there are two sorts of co-production. One is where you have one production company, but they're teaming up with a number of broadcasters, each of whom are putting in a significant amount of money. And another is where you have two production companies in different territories coming together to try and access the money from both of their respective territories and making the programme together.
And I think Australia and Canada and the UK have official co-production treaties. It would involve two producers coming together, or three, from each representing their territory.
Well, an international co-production is when two producers in two different countries come together to produce together in order to access funds from both of those different countries, so that you're going to end up with a bigger budget to make your film. It could even be two broadcasters coming together to work together for the same reason, being that they want to increase a budget and also to maximise an audience.
A pre-sale is when a broadcaster gets involved in a project quite early on. It could be at treatment stage or at a rough cut, and you put up the pre-sale so you can have some editorial input into the project for your territory, and it also guarantees you secure the rights to the film for your territory at an early stage.
I think it's sometimes a blurry line between a pre-sale and a co-production, but the sense is with a pre-sale, less money is coming from the broadcaster, about the same amount of money you'd have for an acquisition, and therefore the editorial involvement, even though the film hasn't been completed, is less from that broadcaster.
So what is a pre-sale? If you've already got a co-production deal, that means that you've got quite a significant amount of money to make your film, but probably not yet enough to complete the budget. So then what you do is you look for pre-sales, which are smaller amounts of money than a co-production deal that can help you complete the budget. And the way you do that is you go around to a number of different broadcasters internationally, see if you can get them to part with some money before the film's been completed. And the reason they might want to do that is so that they've got something secured, so there's another broadcaster then can't get hold of it. Or because they need to know that when that programme's delivered, they can show it immediately because it's part of a season or because it's topical. But they're taking a little bit of a risk, because if it's just an acquisition, of course, they can look at the programme and decide whether or not it meets their needs. But with a pre-sale, there's a little bit of a gamble there, because they don't have enough of an involvement as a co-producer to be able to dictate how that programme turns out. They might be able to look at a rough cut, like a version of the film before it's been finally completed, and make a few recommendations there, but that's about all they'll get.
There are two different ways of doing co-productions. One is one producer trying to tout his project around the world on his own, and another is where one producer finds another producer in another country and decides to work with them to sell their project. They both have their benefits. One involves, doing it on your own. You keep your editorial control, you keep your team, all the profit goes to you. However, it's hard work. And to sell in some countries takes expertise. For instance, in my country, in the BBC, it's very hard for international producers to pitch directly, very easy for UK producers, so there's always a level of access. There's also, in many countries, funds specifically for producers from that country, which can only be accessed by them. So, for instance, in Ireland, if you have an Irish production company, you can take money from the Irish Film Board. It can be a very significant help for your budget. So the benefit of co-producing with one or more production companies is that you can access all sorts of money that wouldn't be available to you as an international producer.
If I've got a great idea for a film, why would I want to team up with another production company in another country in order to make that film? Because then I'd be sacrificing maybe some income and maybe some of the intellectual property. Well, the reason is that person will be able to help me finance the film. It could be that in the country they come from, say it might be France, they have the right as French citizens in a French-based production company to access funds that I would never be able to access myself. So then there's a clear financial motive for us to team up and for that to happen.
The positives of these co-productions is that you access pots of money that otherwise isn't available. But the downside is they inflate budgets and they can be quite cumbersome. So unless there is a genuine reason to sort of look to another country to do a co-production, it's sometimes just easier to actually sell your idea and project internationally on your own.
There is also sometimes a real editorial benefit to it. You may find that one production company has a certain expertise in making history films. You've got a great history idea, but you're known as an observational filmmaker. You can have massive editorial interplay. So there can be a real benefit to it editorially as well, but it does come with its costs.
If you do an international co-production, then you also will have to be prepared to probably make different versions of that film, because each broadcaster has different needs. And as soon as they sign on with a significant amount of money, they need to be absolutely sure that it's going to meet those needs. And sometimes that means a slightly different approach, or it could mean a different host. It could mean a slightly different running time. A lot of this business is about relationships. It's often said that maybe that accounts for about 60% of the success of a film is actually knowing the right people to be able to talk to about it and be able to get a foot in that door. So if you've got a great idea for a film but you haven't yet built up those sorts of relationships, you might want to team up with an executive producer.
Executive producer or a number of executive producers are people who help raise funds to make a project happen. So there's different types of executive producers. Some are creative and some are financial.
Yeah, the creative executive producer is often someone who's known to the broadcaster, who's older and experienced, and perhaps will provide an air of reassurance to the broadcaster. And that's someone who will go in and will look at rough cuts and will help you in an editorial way to shape your story so that it works for that particular broadcaster. But you also have executive producers who are extremely skilled at accessing funds and raising money, and sometimes they fulfill an entirely different role, which is largely non-editorial.
They can advise you on how to structure your film so that it will appeal to funders, but they also probably have those relationships with the funders where they can get the meetings in the first place and either represent you at those meetings or bring you into those meetings with them. But they have the relationships, which is incredibly important to you, but they also have the trust of the people that you're going to have those meetings with. So the broadcaster would like to work with that EP because they know that by working with them, they can trust them to make sure that you deliver something that they can show at the end of the process.
As a broadcaster, we'd often, if we pitched an idea from an emerging filmmaker who has no previous track record or history, we would often team them up with an executive producer we trust editorially, so they provide guidance.
There are also normally not only one executive producer on a project, because often a broadcaster will also allocate one of their own staff as an executive producer who will bring another perspective, and often that's the role of the commissioning editor. That then is not a financial involvement, that's a pure editorial involvement where your executive producer will come in, will look at your rough cuts, will suggest you change your structure or your characters and be heavily involved in that respect. So you often have sort of 2 or 3 people to work to in terms of executive producers.